Michael, social interaction is correlated with retirement satisfaction. Are there specific types of interactions that have more impact on satisfaction than others?
There are. There have been studies that have looked at the amount of satisfaction that we get from meeting with people who we have a closer relationship with. And the studies obviously find that we tend to get more satisfaction when we're spending time with people who we've developed a relationship with, a deeper relationship.
Often that's family, right?
Well, that can be, and that's an interesting question, because our friends are people who we've chosen to maintain social contact with, and if we don't have positive interactions with those people, then we can just reject them. As opposed to family, we can have positive or we can have negative relationships with our family. And one of the issues with family is that some of the strongest relationships, the most rewarding relationships that we have in life, are with our family or our children if they're positive. But if they're not positive, then they can have a negative impact on life satisfaction. And one of the issues with families is that we don't always have a choice between only interacting with those with whom we have positive relationships and those with whom we have maybe less supportive relationships.
So you're saying probably our most satisfying interactions are with our close friends because we choose them.
The most consistently satisfying relationships are with close friends. The most satisfying relationships are with family or children that you have a close relationship with. But in terms of getting the most out of retirement, maintaining close relationships with a group of people and having frequent interactions with them, people who are supportive, that has a big impact on your global life satisfaction.
And dump those family members that you don't like, right? No, I'm just kidding. All right.
Well, you can't always get rid of your family members, but you can attempt to maintain positive relationships with family members. And one of the most interesting things that we also saw is that if you live within 10 miles of your children, that didn't actually have a positive impact on your global life satisfaction. So if part of your retirement plan is to move closer to family, then the data doesn't necessarily support that is the best idea, and it may not even be the best way to maintain positive social interactions with family members. So you know what your relationships are with your family members and what the potential minefields are. It's obviously important to maintain positive relationships with family members, but that may not mean moving close to them.
So I would think a challenge in retirement would be that activities need to change as people age and their capacity for activities change. Being ready to adjust and modify activities, this might be a challenge for many people, being ready to take on that task. Is that true?
I think it makes sense to pay attention to the types of activities that we expect to engage in during retirement, to make a plan for it, because we know that certain types of activities tend to provide more satisfaction. Those types of activities that enhance or deepen social interactions might be more positive in terms of life satisfaction. Engaging in habits that don't improve our abilities to maintain interactions with other people or don't give us an opportunity to actually use our skills. Those are not associated with higher life satisfaction. But what happens over time is that we develop habits. We tend to do the same thing tomorrow that we did yesterday.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to get at here is I think it's really hard. You're in early retirement and you've done a good job of planning and you got a very active life, and then something happens to you physically, and now you have to change your activities. And we know it's a good idea to think that through, but it's not so easy, especially because now you've got these habits and now suddenly you can't do them anymore. I almost wonder if that's a role for the financial advisor. I mean, you meet with a client, you find that they're unhappy because they have some health limitations and they can't play golf anymore, and you can help them pivot, I would think, into figuring out what they can do next in their life to enjoy and enhance their life.
Well, it's always better to have planned for this ahead of time, I think. Having a negative health event force you to change your habits and not having a plan for how it's going to change your habit is inevitably going to lead to a large amount of dissatisfaction. But let's be honest about the natural physical progression that we're going to make throughout old age. We know that after a certain point, we're going to be less likely to engage in activities that require a certain amount of physical health. So can we anticipate ahead of time how we're going to change our living situation in order to deal with that inevitable change in our physical abilities? I think if we plan for it and then we decide at some point that we've reached that stage, and I think the role of an advisor is to maybe sit down as part of a retirement plan to decide, okay, when you reach this stage, What do you plan to do? What is the best course of action? And then by the time you reach that stage, you've already gone through that decision-making process, and it's not quite so traumatic.
So the best thing you can do is get people to think about what's going to happen, and as retirement progresses.
I think that just having built that ability to imagine what will happen, what is the rational thing to do in that situation, it's so much easier to do. It's always easier to do planning ahead, because then the emotion doesn't necessarily become part of our decision-making process. We know that when we're in the moment, then the emotion sometimes takes over, and by the time we've reached significant physical decline, we may not have the ability to make some of the more complex choices that we could have made earlier on in retirement.
It's funny, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about, like parents with young children, you have to have a list of activities for when it's sunny out, and a list of activities, how do you keep the kids busy when it's raining out? And I'm thinking, like, in retirement, when I build my list of things I'm going to do in retirement, I sort of need my list of things I can do when I can get around, and things that I can do when I can't get around so easily. It's sort of, it's your bucket list has to include active and less active type of activities. It's interesting.
And there are plenty of enjoyable things that you can do when you're slightly less active. I mean, you may be playing tennis when you're in your 60s and 70s. You may be going on cruises when you're in your 80s. But there are these types of activities that will probably change over time. And it's best to plan, even financially, for the change in those types of activities.
Right. So that's very interesting. How about planning? We talked about planning for activities. How about planning for this whole issue of social interactions in retirement? We know that it's important. We know spending time with family and friends is important. Is there any planning that's necessary or that can be done to make sure that we can have that type of lifestyle in retirement?
Well, we know that people who are in different types of living situations have different frequency of social interactions. It's actually interesting to see the amount of happiness that people who are homeowners have into old age. And in fact, if we look at homeowners and we look at apartment dwellers or renters, there's an inflection point. There's a point at which, after a certain age, people who live in apartments are actually happier than people who live in a home. And I think it's important to understand that ahead of time, so you can plan on changing your living situation at a certain point. And that doesn't happen early on in retirement, but it probably is going to happen in your late 70s or about the time you hit age 80, that you're going to be happier in a different type of life situation. And if you're in an apartment, your opportunities for social interaction can actually increase.
Yeah, and I guess financial planning doesn't get in the way of your social interactions either. I mean, the more resources you have, the more opportunity you have.
That's right. It buys you options.
Right. Some people have vacation homes for that purpose, to bring as a place to bring their family and friends together.
Right.
So, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This video was made possible by the New York Life Center for Retirement Income.